The rain had a way of erasing things in this town: footprints on the sidewalk, chalk lines on the street, even the faint scent of flowers left too long in a grave. But it could never wash away the quiet ache of being unseen. I was used to moving through life without notice. My work clothes were plain, my shoes worn thin, my head often bowed in places where people preferred not to be reminded of the ones who served them. I polished silver in houses where chandeliers sparkled like frozen rain, where my own reflection in the glass was something I pretended not to see. I had long ago accepted that my name, Daniel Howell, was only mine in the smallest, most private sense, until the day an envelope arrived. It was thick, the kind that seemed to carry weight even before it was opened. The handwriting was sharp, deliberate, and somehow ... old-fashioned. My address was written in careful ink, my name underlined once, as though the sender feared I might forget it was meant for me. I almost threw it away. That's the truth. Letters like this didn't come to people like me. They went to the ones whose names were printed in gold on office doors or etched into marble plaques. But when I tore it open, my hands felt unsteady. Inside was a single sheet of cream-colored paper and a photograph. The photo was worn at the edges, black and white, showing a man in a tailored suit standing beside a young woman whose smile looked forced, like it had been placed there for the sake of appearances. Between them was a child, dark hair, solemn eyes. My eyes. The letter was short. Daniel, there are truths you were never told. You have a right to know them. Come to Ashford Hall, Sunday at noon. Bring no one. It was signed with a name I recognized, though I had never spoken it aloud. Edmund Ashford. The Ashfords were not just wealthy. They were a dynasty. Their name appeared in newspapers, beside words like philanthropy, heritage, and legacy. But in whispers, it appeared beside other words: arrogance, coldness, power. They owned the largest shipping company on the eastern coast and a portfolio of properties so vast they could lose a mansion and never notice. And now one of them had written to me. I didn't sleep that night. I kept staring at the photograph, my mind circling questions I didn't know how to ask. My mother had passed away years ago, and she had never once hinted at a connection to anyone beyond our modest, narrow life. She had worked long hours cleaning offices, never complained, and told me that family was what you built, not what you were born into. Yet the child in the photo me stood between two strangers who looked nothing like the life I knew. When Sunday came, the sky was gray, the kind of muted daylight that flattens everything into shades of doubt. Ashford Hall stood at the end of a long iron-gated drive, its stone facade towering, its windows tall and narrow like watchful eyes. The gates were already open. A man in a dark coat waited at the entrance. He looked at me as though measuring my worth in a glance. "Mr. Hawley," he said without warmth. "This way." Inside, the air smelled faintly of old books and something floral, expensive, delicate, controlled. He led me through a corridor lined with portraits of unsmiling men and women, their eyes painted to follow you no matter where you stood. In a study with walls of dark wood, I saw him, Edmund Ashford. He was older now, his hair silvered, but there was no mistaking the man from the photograph. "You came," he said, as though surprised. "You asked me to." He studied me for a long moment before speaking again. "I don't have much time, and neither do you, if the rest of my family discovers you're here." "Why would they care?" I asked. His gaze didn't waver. "Because you are my son." The words seemed too large to fit in the room. My breath caught somewhere between disbelief and a kind of recognition I couldn't name. "That's impossible," I said. "My father was never told the truth," Edmund interrupted. "Your mother and I met when she worked for my company. She was extraordinary. But my family would never have allowed our marriage. They forced me to choose. And I," he looked away, shame flickering across his features, I chose wrong. They sent her away, paid her to disappear, and when you were born, they erased you from every record they could touch. I wanted to speak, but the words were tangled, caught in the disbelief that something like this could be spoken so plainly. From a drawer, he pulled out a folder and slid it across the desk. Inside were documents, birth records, letters, even a draft of a will naming me as a beneficiary, and photographs. My mother holding me as an infant. Edmund standing in the background, smiling in a way that made him look almost human. "They'll deny this," he said. "They'll call it a fabrication, a trick. But the truth is here, and it is yours." I touched the papers as though they might dissolve. Proof, so heavy in my hands I felt its weight in my bones. "What do you want me to do with this?" "Live with it," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "And when the time comes, use it." Before I could ask what he meant, the door opened. A woman stepped in, tall, elegant, her hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to sharpen her features. She looked from Edmund to me, her eyes narrowing. "What is this?" she asked. "My sister," Edmund said quietly. "Margaret, this is—" "I know exactly who he is," she cut in. "And he has no place here." Her voice was ice, each word a blade. "Leave, now. Whatever fantasy you've been sold, it ends here." She reached for the folder, but I was faster, pulling it to my chest. "Those are mine," I said. My voice was steadier than I felt. Margaret's eyes flashed, but she said nothing more. She stepped aside, as though the sight of me in her home was something too distasteful to confront directly. Outside, the rain had begun again, steady and cold. I clutched the folder under my coat. Knowing I carried more than paper, I carried a truth powerful enough to break through the walls of Ashford Hall. I didn't yet know when or how I would use it, but I knew this: I was no longer invisible, and they would have to see me, whether they wanted to or not. The days after my visit to Ashford Hall felt unreal, as though my life had split into two timelines, one I had always known, and another that had been hidden from me, waiting for a moment like this to surface. I returned to my small apartment, the folder never leaving my sight. I kept it beneath my pillow at night, not out of paranoia, but out of instinct, as if its contents might vanish if I let them out of reach. Each evening, I opened it again. I studied my mother's handwriting in the letter's gentle curves, certain strokes, each word carrying a tenderness I had always felt from her, but now laced with an unspoken grief. I read Edmund's words, too, though they were harder to face. Apologies written too late, promises never kept, affection smothered under the weight of family duty and fear. The photographs were the strangest part. Seeing myself as a child, in clothes I didn't remember, standing in rooms I had never thought I'd been in, made my own memory feel fragile. I began to wonder if my past was only a fragment of the whole story, and how much else had been altered to keep me in the shadows. It didn't take long before word reached me, not from Edmund, but from the small, unkind world that whispers faster than it listens. A coworker stopped me in the hallway one morning. "Hey, someone from the paper called asking about you. Said they were doing a piece on the Ashford family. You in some kind of trouble?" My pulse quickened. "No trouble," I said too quickly. "Nothing worth talking about." But the truth was spreading in ways I hadn't planned. The Ashfords were a family obsessed with control, and the fact that I now existed in the public eye even faintly meant they would act. 3 nights later, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, a man in a tailored coat stood in the hallway, holding a slim leather briefcase. "Mr. Hall," he said, "I'm here on behalf of Margaret Ashford. She has instructed me to offer you a settlement in exchange for discretion." He opened the briefcase just enough for me to see the stacks of cash inside. My stomach turned. "And if I refuse?" His smile was practiced, professional. then I'm afraid you will find your life becoming very complicated. I thought of my mother, of the years she had spent working herself to exhaustion, never asking for more than dignity. To take their money would be to sell her silence all over again. I stepped back. Tell Margaret I'm not for sale. His expression didn't change, but the air in the hallway seemed to tighten. He closed the briefcase with a click and left without another word. I knew then that my existence had shifted from inconvenience to threat. And threats, in families like the Ashfords, were not tolerated. A week passed. I kept my head down at work, but the calls began unknown numbers, voices that hung in silence before hanging up. My mailbox filled with blank envelopes. I came home one night to find my front door slightly open, though nothing inside had been taken. It was meant to unnerve me, and it worked. Still, I couldn't let go of what I carried. I began to make copies of the documents, scanning each page and storing them in places even I didn't think about too long. I met with a friend from years ago, a quiet man named Lewis who worked in local journalism. I didn't give him everything, just enough to understand that there was a story here, one that could not be buried by money or intimidation. Lewis listened without interrupting, his pen moving slowly across his notebook. "If you go public with this," he said, "it won't just be about family secrets. You'll be opening a war. Are you ready for that?" "I don't want war," I said. "I want truth." He looked at me for a long moment before nodding. "Then let's make sure you have the proof lined up in a way they can't destroy." In the meantime, Edmund reached out again, not with another letter, but with a phone call. His voice was low, urgent. "They know you have the documents. Margaret will stop at nothing. You must be careful. Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "You had years to protect us. Why now?" There was a pause. "Because my health is failing, and because in the end, I cannot let them erase you twice." His voice cracked on the last word. It was the first time I'd heard him sound human. When the call ended, I felt the ground shifting again. Time was running out, not just for him, but for the story I now carried. The decision came to me in the quiet of the night. If the Ashfords wanted silence, then the only way to answer was with noise loud enough that it could never be taken back. I didn't need revenge, but I needed the truth to breathe in the open air, and I knew exactly where that would happen. The Ashfords were holding their annual charity gala, a night drenched in silk and champagne, where cameras flashed and journalists circled like bees to honey. It was the perfect stage. The night of the gala arrived, wrapped in cold air and the faint scent of winter. I wore the only suit I owned, charcoal gray, pressed as best I could, and carried nothing more than a small leather folder tucked inside my coat. Ashford Hall was lit like a cathedral, its long driveway lined with lanterns that cast warm pools of light across the gravel. Luxury cars purred up to the entrance, releasing guests dressed in black-tie perfection. Every step they took seemed choreographed, as though belonging here was something rehearsed. I stayed in the shadows until I saw the press gathering near the main entrance. Photographers readied their cameras, calling out names as each prominent figure arrived. Margaret Ashford descended from a silver sedan in a gown that shimmered like ice. She smiled for the cameras with a precision that had no warmth, flanked by other family members in tailored suits and polished jewels. When the moment felt right, I stepped forward. The security at the door moved quickly, blocking my path, their earpieces glinting in the light. "Name?" one of them asked, already expecting the answer would send me away. "Daniel Howe," I said evenly. It was enough to cause a ripple. One guard looked uncertain. The other glanced toward Margaret. Her smile faltered when she saw me. "Let him in," she said, her voice like glass breaking. Inside, the grand hall shimmered with crystal chandeliers and gold accents. Waiters moved through the crowd with silver trays of champagne, and a string quartet played softly near the staircase. Conversations were a murmur of power deals, politics, legacies. I felt eyes on me as I walked, though I kept mine fixed ahead. I found Edmund near the far side of the room, seated in a high-backed chair. He looked smaller than I remembered, his skin pale, but his gaze held mine with quiet resolve. "You came," he said softly. "I told you I wanted the truth. Tonight's the night." He nodded, almost imperceptibly. "Be careful." I stepped toward the center of the room, near the raised platform where a podium stood ready for speeches. Margaret's voice rang out behind me, commanding and cold. "This is not your place, Daniel." I turned to face her. "It wasn't my place, because you made sure it wasn't. But it's mine now." The music faltered. Guests turned. Cameras angled toward us. Margaret moved closer, her smile fixed again for the audience. "Our family event is not the place for personal grievances." I opened the leather folder and held up the first photograph my mother, holding me as a baby, Edmund standing behind her. "This isn't a grievance," I said, my voice carrying over the hush. "It's history, and it belongs to me as much as it belongs to you." I laid the photograph on the podium, followed by letters in my mother's handwriting, the birth records, the draft of the will with my name written in Edmund's hand. The sound of paper against wood was louder than I expected. "These," I continued, "are the truths you erased. You built walls around your name, your money, your legacy, but walls can't hold back blood." A low murmur swept through the crowd. Someone's phone camera began recording. Margaret's mask cracked. "None of this proves." "Then let's ask Edmund," I said, turning toward him. He rose slowly, leaning on his cane. Every step he took seemed to weigh more than the last, but when he reached the podium, he stood beside me. "It's true," he said, his voice rough but steady. "Daniel is my son, my firstborn. I failed him and his mother because I let this family dictate my choices. That ends tonight." A silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't empty. It was full of shifting ground, of power bending in ways it never had before. Cameras flashed. Whispers turned into conversations. Somewhere in the back of the room, a journalist I recognized from Lewis's newsroom was already moving toward us. Margaret's hands tightened at her sides. "You're making a mistake," she hissed at Edmund. "The mistake," he said, looking directly at her, was believing silence was strength. I felt something lift inside me, not triumph, not revenge, but a kind of release I hadn't known I needed. The rest of the evening blurred. People I had never met came forward to shake my hand, to ask questions, to offer condolences for a life they had only just learned existed. The press swarmed, their pens and cameras capturing every detail. By the time I left the hall, the story was already moving beyond those walls. It would not be contained. Outside, the night air was sharp and clean. I walked down the drive alone, the leather folder still in my coat, though its weight felt different, now lighter, as if the truth no longer needed my protection. The Ashfords would survive this. They had too much money and too much influence not to. But their control over my story was gone, and that was enough. In the weeks that followed the gala, the air around my life seemed to shift. The story spread first in the local papers, then in national headlines. It wasn't told as a scandal, exactly, but as an unraveling a family portrait, torn at the edges to reveal a hidden figure long painted over. My name appeared in print alongside the words heir, illegitimate, and recognition. Some called me courageous, others opportunistic. The truth didn't fit neatly in either box. I returned to work, though it no longer felt like the same place. My coworkers looked at me differently, some with quiet curiosity, others with a newfound respect, and a few with suspicion, as if proximity to wealth, even by blood, might change me in ways they couldn't see yet. But I didn't change my routines. I still took the bus in the mornings. I still cooked my meals at home. I still visited my mother's grave every Sunday, leaving fresh flowers and telling her about the days she wasn't here to see. Then, a letter came not from the Ashfords, but from a law firm bearing their crest. It was a formal acknowledgment of my paternity, signed by Edmund himself, filed with the necessary authorities. Enclosed was a legal amendment to his will, ensuring I would inherit a share of his estate. No conditions, no clauses. Just a signature. I knew what this meant. Margaret and the others would contest it the moment he passed. But it was still proof, now sealed in a way that no amount of money could erase. I visited Edmund once more before winter set in. His health had worsened, his voice thinner, his skin marked by the quiet fading of strength. "You've given me peace," he said, his eyes fixed on mine. "For years, I thought the greatest gift I could give you was money, property, something tangible. But I see now it's something else. It's your name, spoken without shame." I didn't know what to say, so I simply nodded. When I left that day, I didn't know it would be the last time I saw him alive. His passing made headlines, of course. The funeral was a spectacle of black silk and whispered politics. I stood apart from the family cluster, watching as they greeted dignitaries and old friends. Margaret met my eyes only once, her expression unreadable. After the service, the reading of the will took place in the same study where I'd first heard Edmund's truth. The lawyer's voice was calm, deliberate, as he listed bequests and instructions. My name came near the end, not with the largest share, but with enough to change the course of my life. Margaret's protest was immediate, her words cutting through the formality like a blade. "This is absurd. He barely knew this man." The lawyer didn't flinch. "The documents are in order. The court will uphold them." I said nothing. I didn't need to. Weeks later, the funds transferred into my account. I didn't buy a car or a new apartment or any of the things people might expect. Instead, I set up a scholarship fund in my mother's name for children from working-class families, like me, who might carry brilliance without the means to let it grow. The first time I told someone about it, they asked if it was a way to get back at the Ashfords. I told them no. This was about planting something they couldn't uproot. One evening, months after the funeral, I returned to Ashford Hall, not for a confrontation, but because Edmund had left me a key. The house was quiet, its grandeur dimmed without the constant hum of guests and servants. In the study, I found another envelope with my name. Inside was a single note in his handwriting. "Daniel, you are more than a name, more than an inheritance. Carry this truth well, and it will outlast everything we built here." I sat in that room for a long time, the weight of those words settling into me like a slow, steady tide. Outside, the ground stretched wide under the pale moonlight. Somewhere beyond the trees, the gates stood tall, as they always had. But I no longer saw them as barriers. The Ashfords would go on, as families like theirs always do, polishing their image, adjusting the frame, pretending the cracks were never there. But the truth was no longer locked inside their walls. It lived in me now, and I had no intention of hiding it again. I walked away from Ashford Hall without looking back, the night air cool against my face, the quiet around me no longer heavy but alive. For the first time in my life, I wasn't thinking about the family I had been denied. I was thinking about the one I could choose to build. And that, I realized, was the truest inheritance of all.